15.
Tesvav, Sisas Akrashon Mishkan, you shall make the beams for the dwelling of Atzeshitim Emdim, acacia wood standing upright. Rashi. The Sisas Akrashon, you shall make the beams. It should have been said, you shall make beams, as it says by every object. What are the beams? What do the beams signify? It means the beams were to be from those which were ready and designated for that purpose. So you should make the beams, not a Land Rover, the Land Rover, right? The, what do you call the? Like when you say the thing, not a thing.
Oh, definitive article.
Definitive article.
Whoa.
So what were the beams? The beams that Yaakov Avinu had planted in Egypt, knowing that one day they're going to need them to make them for a temple. And when he died, he commanded his sons to bring them up with him when they left Egypt. And he said to them, God is going to one day command them to make a temple in the desert from these beams. See that they should be ready in your hands.
Navi and Asadi.
So literally they did a whole... So what happened? Like I guess where they left, they cut them all down and took beams with them. This is what the Babylonian Rabbi Shlomo, the son of Yehuda, who lived over 1,000 years ago and composed many piyutim, many hymns. He wrote a liturgical poem. It's in the Shacharis service on the first day of Pesach, some congregations. It says that that Tosmata Mizorezim, the plant of those urged by their father Yaakov, grew rapidly to become the cedar beams of our house.
Yeah,
referring to the fact that they were urged to have them ready beforehand. Okay, good. Shittim, every year we go through this, they translate as pine wood. Istanism in Old French, upright, first of all, upright. That the length of the beams should be positioned vertically in the walls of the dwelling, but do not make the walls with horizontal beams, but the width of the beams form the height. You don't stack them. Rather, they're all, skinny next to each other. They say pine wood, we say acacia wood. I don't know, it's both. Tezayin. The length of each beam was 10 ames. And 1.5 cubits, 1.5 cubits is the width of one beam.
That's how they make houses today.
Yeah.
Beams going up.
The length of each beam shall be 10 cubits. Here we learned the height of the dwelling was 10 cubits. Yeah. 1.5 was its width. Here we learned the length of the Mishkan was 20, which was 20 beams, we'll see, from south and the north sides, was 30 ames. There was 2 protrusions for each beam. Carved out like dowels for each beam. So you should make for all the beams of the dwelling. Says Rashi, there shall be 2 projections for each beam. He would carve out the beam at the bottom of the mid. He would carve out the beam at the bottom, in the middle, to the height of 1 cubit. So you carve in the bottom, a cubit high, and leave a quarter of its width, which is 1.5, on one side, and a quarter of its width on the other side. And these are the projections. And the carved out part was half the width of the beam in the middle. Leave a quarter. Let me see. I have it. What page? 64. So, okay. These projections return to the bases, which were hollow. The bases were a cubit high and sat in a continuous line of 40. And the one next to the other. The projections of the beams that were inserted into the hollow of the bases were carved out on three sides. Projections of the beams that were inserted into the hollow of the bases were carved out, right. Okay, let's see.
I assume on 64 I'll show you
A
that.
little bit, yeah. The width of the carved out beam being as wide as the rim of the base, so that the beam would cover the entire top of the base. If not, there'd be a space between the one beam and the next of the rims of the two bases separating between them. This is what it says, that the beams should be flush together at the bottom, and the sides of projections be carved in a way the beams to join each other. So basically, it's really carved out all around, it seems like.
Here, this is might be better.
That's a better see this.
Maybe. Is that it?
What page is it?
Is that it?
Yeah, it seems that
What page?
page 499. One second.
Mhm. That's the same, that's the same thing.
Same thing.
I mean,
17. So two of the projections were 1 cubit long
Mm-hmm.
and half a cubit wide and a quarter of a cubit broad.
Mm-hmm.
Quarter of a cubit broad.
Is he talking about this right now?
Parallel to each other, you must have them.
No, I understand, but he's saying quarter and this and that.
So you have half a cubit, and each one is half a cubit. So that's 1.5. Then you have half a cubit, yeah, because there's 1.5. And a quarter cubit. So quarter, half. Wide or broad? Cubit. So quarter, half is 1. Yeah, okay. Moving along. Mishulavais, they were like rungs of a ladder. Asuyas kimishulavais slum of Dalzamazu. Mishubim Mashain Lakana Sechaladan Kishliva Chnes Menek Kebumidi. So basically, a rung goes to the hole of the ladder, this went to the base. Yudcha Ishalachaisa Rashi. Each one, sister to sister, which means, they're corresponding to each other, meaning that the way the grooves are, the way they're grooved out is exactly the same each one. So that there shouldn't be two, there shouldn't be two going to this way or that way. But Targum shows Tzirin, and the English translates it as Tzirin. Things that resemble the hinges of a door that was inserted in the holes of the threshold. Yudches, as he says, you shall make the beams of the dwelling, Esim Keresh Lafas Negma Timona, 20 beams to the south facing side. Yudtes, Verboim, they cast 40 silver bases. Tasa Tachas Esim Keresh shall make under the 20 beams. Shnei Adanim Tachas Keresh Chadashid, they shall have 2 bases under each beam for the 2 protrusions. Shnei Adanim Tachas Keresh Chadashid, and 2 sockets under the keresh for the 2 protrusions. Yeah, so you got two cinder blocks. Okay. You shall yeah. Olden day hinges were like, protrusion. Okay, moving along. Yod Ches. You shall make the beams for the dwelling 20 beams to the south facing side. I said already. Chaf. Rashi, Vas Negvatimana for this A peah does not mean a corner. Here means a side. As Onkelos translates it as L'ruach Evar Derema, for the south-facing side. Because peah can mean a corner, it can mean a side. Here means a side. Chav, Chaf, yeah. Well, tell Mishkan and Shir Slavas Safin as Sim Kaddish. And for the side of the second side of the Mishkan, the north side, 20 beams as well. Chaval, V'Arbayim Ad Nikasa, 40 sockets of silver. Shnei Adanim, 2 sockets under one base. Shnei Adanim Tachas HaGesh Echad, and 2 sockets under the other beam. Sorry. Chav Beis, Uliyarki Mishkan Yom. And what about the rear of the dwelling of the Mishkan on the west side? Tasa Shishkari makes 6. Rashi. Layarka says unusual word, it means safe. Sorry. Because why is it called the end? Why is the Yarka the rear? Because what's the front? The front is the east side. So the west can be the back side. Thank you. Yeah.
Corners back.
Yeah, very good. And the west is the back side. That's what's called the end because the face is the front. Tasi Shikrashim, you shall make 6 beams. There's 9 beams for the width. 9 beams for the width. Okay. Chav Gimel Shnei Krashim Taslim Sois Mishkan. There are 2 beams for these corners. Limikutsais Mishkan. Make 2 beams for the corners of the Mishkan by Yerchasem at its rear. Chav Gimel Shnei Krashim Taslim Kutsais. You should make another 2 beams for the corners. One for the northwestern corner and the other for the southwestern corner. All 8 beams, they're all in one. All 8 beams were in one line, except that these 2 were not entirely facing the inner space of the dwelling, but only half a cubit of one, half a cubit of the other was visible in the inner space. The northwest and the southwest. All 8 was in one line, but those last 2 are not going to all be in the internal because they're blocked by the walls. Half an amma of one of those on each side you could see, but that made it into the 6 times 1.5 is 9, and a half is 10. And the amma, the other amma, because it's 1.5, the other one of the cubits is blocked by the wall. See what I'm saying? You can see it on the see it all over, but I'm saying it would be probably in the Chayenu on page 64.
Yeah.
You could see that, the corners are partially in the, you can see, can't really see it here so well. Probably better picture there, get closer. See, here's a better picture. If you look here, you can see those, a little bit is seen, but a lot of it's blocked by the wall, right? The corner pieces. Okay, moving along. So the corner from the outside would be even as well. Okay. Chav Dalet v'yu say milmata, all the beams should be flush together. V'yachtav you tam al rishon, they should be flush at the top. How? El tabas achas, with every 2 beams slotted into one ring. Kenny l'shneim, so should be to both of them. L'shneim ksasio, so should be with the 2 corner beams at both corners. Rashi, they should be flush at the bottom. Why? Because at the bottom, all the beams should be flush with each other. There should be no space between the sockets and them to differentiate, to separate them. This is how I explained it, that the protrusions are, that they're grooved out, not just in the middle, but also on the side, that the width of the beam sticks out to the side, outside its beam to cover the socket. So to the other socket. Likewise, each corner beam of the western group was carved out along its width. Its thickness corresponding to the portion carved from the side of the adjacent beams of the northern and southern walls, so the base not separate between them. Yusamim, and they together there will be samim parallel. At the top of the beam as well, there should be into one ring. What does Rashi say? Rashi says at the top of the beam, into one ring. Each beam had 2 grooves carved out on top along its width. You can see it in the picture. The Hein, it's on page 64, the picture. So there's these 2 like grooves.
$4.99.
Yeah, fine. He inserted it into the matching groove of the next beam into one ring, thus making a flush with the adjoining beam. However, I do not know if these rings were fixed or movable, and regarding the beam in each corner, a ring was slotted into the width of both the southernmost and the northernmost beam, and the top of each corner beam in the western rows. In the corner, a ring was slotted into the width of both the southernmost and northernmost beam, and the top of each corner beam on the western was inserted into each one respectively. Thus, basically, it locked it together. Ken Yushem, so there should be for the 2 corner beams, the beam at the north side and the adjoining beam on the west side should be on the same both corners. Chafei. Okay, we can actually finish. Chafei. There should be 8 beams and their silver bases. Shisha Sardonim, 16 bases for this the west the back wall. 2 sockets for one beam. 2 sockets for the other every beam. Rashi, there was 8 beams. These are the same mentioned above. You should make 6 beams. And now it's saying, plus you have the 2 corners, that's 8. This would stay in the Mishnah and the Malachas HaMishkan that we quoted, dealing the method of arranging the beams. How do you make them? He made the bases hollow and carved the Adonim, and carved out each beam at the bottom a quarter of its width on one side, a quarter on the other. And the carved out part was half its width in the middle, a quarter. He thus made 2 projections resembling 2 chamukim, which I think should be really chavakim, like 2 rungs of ladder separated from one another. And they're planed down so they can be inserted into the hollow part of the base, like a rung inserted into the hole of the upright ladder. And this is the meaning of the term is shulavis, like a rung. He inserted them into 2 bases, as I stated, 2 bases and 2 bases. He made grooves in the beam on top, a finger breadth away from its edge on one side, and a finger breadth from the other, inserted them into a golden ring on the top, that they should be basically clasped together. As it says, the beam should be flush together, the bottom and the top. This is the Brisa and explanation I've set out in the order of the verses. So he says, I'm quoting you the whole Brisa, but I also did it by the verses. He spoon-fed us. Okay. You shall make rods of pine wood. 5 for the beams on one side of the dwelling. You should make rods, acacia wood, okay. Acacia wood. What's brechim? Avrin, which means rods in Old French. 5 beams on one, 5 rods for the beams on one side. What does it mean? These 5 are actually 3, just that the upper and lower were made of 2 pieces, one extending along half the wall and the other extending along the other half of the wall. One's inserted into the rings from one end and the other inserted into the rings on the other end, and until they met each other. Thus, the upper and lower rods were actually 2 made of 4. The middle one was as long as the entire wall, as one long rod extending one wall to the other, one end of the wall, one end to the other end of the wall on the north and south side. The middle rod shall run, extending one end to the other. The upper and lower rods had rings on the beams in which they were inserted. They had rings on the beams. They didn't go inside. They were actually on the outside. It's like a clasp, like what are those locks called? Those
the
locks that are lying on the outside of the door. You just what it's called, latch, whatever. You know what I'm talking.
Right.
Point is, it didn't go inside the beam, the upper and bottom. They went on the outside, and they had these rings that they went through. But however, the middle one, 2 rings. The upper and lower had rings on the beams into which they were inserted. 2 rings for each beam, arranged as though there were 3 of them positioned equally in the 10 cubits height of the beam. One part was from the top ring upward, and one part was from the lower ring downward, each part being a quarter of the length of the beam. Again, the 2 parts were between the rings. All the rings would correspond one to another. I see the picture. It's going to have to be good enough for me.
What are you having trouble?
There's a ring and tube. They show a little different. There's tubes and rings here.
These go up here.
They show it different here. This is the cost is more authoritative.
These go up here and right.
Both. So you got to basically they're essentially covered. There's no exposed rod. It's all under this, like, bolt, not bolt, this
Tube cover.
tube cover,
Tube
yeah,
cover.
bracket,
Bracket,
widget.
widget.
And when in doubt, we'll call it a widget. The middle rod did not have rings, but rather the beams had holes in their thickness, and the rod was inserted through them by the way of the holes, which correspond to one another, and as it means through the center of the beams. The upper and lower rods on the north and south sides, the length of each one was 15 cubits, and the middle one was 30 cubits, which is the one into the other, east to west. Regarding the 5 rods on the west side, the length of the upper and lower were 6 cubits, times 2 is 12. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And the middle one was 12 cubits long, corresponding to 8 beams, because it's really 12 on the outside, 10 on the inside, to measure the cubits. Thus explain Melchus Mishkan. We're almost done. Chav Zayin, V'chamisha V'richim Mekash Tel Mishkan Shinis. 5 rods to the beams on the second side of the dwelling. Chamisha V'richim Mekash Tel Mishkan. 5 rods to the beams of the dwelling and its rear. Yachasayim Yama to the west. Chav Ches V'abriach Hatichim B'sech HaKroshim. The middle rod shall run through the center of the beams, extending from one end to the other. Rashi. You shall cover the beams with gold. You shall make rings of gold for them as casings for the rods, and thus casings for the rods, and thus cover the rods with gold. A casing for the rods. The rings that you shall make on them shall act as casings which the rods shall be inserted. So rings, yeah. But you cover them with gold. Not that the gold was stuck onto the rods, but there was no overlay on them. They were just wood, but rather you attached to the beams 2 kinds of a hollow tube. So there's the ring and there's the 2 parts of the tube, which it showed there. Each like 2 halves of a split hollow cane. He attached them next to the rings on both sides, and the length filled the entire width of the beam, one on one side of the ring and one on the other. The rod was inserted into it, and from it passed into the ring, and from the ring into the second tube. The rods were thus entirely covered with gold, and they were slotted onto the side of the beams. These rods protruded on the outside of the dwelling, the Mishkan, and the rings and tubes were not visible inside the dwelling. The entire was smooth from within. So it's an outer thing. Lamed v'akimoisa, as a Mishkan, you shall thus erect the Mishkan, according to the method, asher haresa bahar, of which you've been shown on the mountain. Rashi, v'akimoisa Mishkan achashi gamra kimeu. After it's completed, you shall erect it. Haresa bahar, which you've been shown on the mountain beforehand. By the time you erect it, you have been given, vision, a presentation on the mountain. That for the future, I will teach you and show you the order of its erection. I mean, not now.
Hashem.
Right, I guess Hashem's going to show him later. All right.